Welcome to Bill's Aviation Podcast, where your stories are our stories. I'm a general aviation pilot, aviation writer, airplane builder, avionics developer, test pilot, and general screw-up. All stories feature Joe and his merry band of miscreants. The purpose of these stories is to educate and entertain pilots. If you have a story you'd like to share anonymously, please contact me. Today's story is titled, Raising the Flaps and Getting Blown into a Tree. Joe was camping with some friends on a remote airstrip. This was a type of airstrip that had no amenities other than being isolated. No pavement, no fuel, no maintenance, etc. Just lots of trees and friends. After a few days of camping, it was time to head home. Joe and his wife Susie Q loaded up their plane after the usual thorough pre-flight and started up, taxied to the end of the runway for departure. While the runway was plenty long enough, it was very narrow and lined with tall trees. Joe likened it to landing in a mail slot. Adding power, Joe's plane lifted off and started climbing. Before clearing the trees, Joe reached down to grab the Johnson bar to raise the flaps. As he did so, he was broadsided by a strong gust of wind, a gust just strong enough to blow Joe, Susie Q, and their airplane into one of the trees that lined the runway. Those observing from the ground saw the tree branch explode into little pieces as Joe's plane slewed to the right and staggered for altitude. Bobby happened to have a handheld radio and called Joe on the CTAF frequency. Bobby asked Joe to perform a quick and gentle control check. A little up, a little down, a little left, and a little right. Joe assured Bobby he was okay and he was going to fly to the nearby county airport to inspect his plane for damage. Upon landing, Joe found the fiberglass wingtip had taken a direct hit in the recess for the position and strobe lights, ripping off 3 or 4 inches of the wingtip. Joe called Bobby and reported the damage assessment. After discussing what he found, Bobby told Joe to go to the nearest hardware store and pick up 5 or 6 aerosol cans of expanding foam, aluminum foil tape, and a hacksaw blade. While Joe was running to the hardware store, the rest of the campers loaded up and flew over to the county airport where Joe had landed and awaited Joe's return from the hardware store. Upon examining the damage, Bobby noticed the fiberglass wingtip had been pushed back and was binding with the aileron. A quick call to Joe had him go back to the hardware store to pick up a file. Once Joe returned to the airport, Bobby used the file to relieve the fiberglass wingtip to keep it from contacting the aileron and potentially binding the controls on Joe's flight home. Bobby then moved on to filling the wingtip and securing the now dangling wires with the expanding foam. While he was doing this, Joe and friends formed a human shield around the wingtip so no one could see what Bobby was doing. After the foam had hardened, the hacksaw blade was used to shape the foam to match the undamaged wingtip. Once the shaping was completed, the aluminum foil tape was used to cover the wingtip and protect it from the rain that was expected on Joe's flight home. While Bobby was busy repairing, and I use that term lightly, Joe's wingtip, the airport crowd kept driving by to see what was going on, and as they did, the shoulder-to-shoulder human shield would move in an arc to keep anyone from seeing what was going on. Once the Rube Goldberg repair was completed, Joe and Susie Q climbed in and departed for home, as did the others who were camping with him that weekend. Upon arriving home, Joe called Bobby and told him they made it home safely. Monday morning came, and Joe had his mechanic inspect the wingtip, order a replacement tip, order LED upgrades for the position and strobe lights, and remove the damaged wingtip. Joe also placed a call to the FSDO to tell them what had happened and begged for forgiveness. It turned out that once the FSDO found out that only the fiberglass was damaged, they didn't care and wished Joe a good day. After the wingtip was replaced and all the new lights installed, Joe and Bobby got together to discuss their next adventure. It was then that Joe told Bobby that there was so much expanding foam in the wingtip, it was a good thing they removed the wingtip when they did, because it continued to expand and foam oozed out of that wingtip for a week. Lesson learned: when departing an airport, any airport, do not make any configuration changes to the airplane until well clear of all obstacles. As a result of this story, I find myself calling out, clear of trees, flaps up. And to be clear, it was not I who hit the tree that day. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, please hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe by clicking on the logo in the lower right of your screen. If you really like what you heard, please help support this channel and become a Patreon. Part of the donations will go to aviation safety and aviation youth programs. Be sure to check out next week's story about Joe getting barfed on by a young passenger.